And good afternoon, racing fans. Jim Miller and Emily Gullikson with Club Hawthorne Live. This is week number 3. We're coming to you from our Joliet Club Hawthorne location. Emily, a little bit of a drive for you today on this chilly Friday, but at least we have some racing to focus on, but just southern state racing for the most part today.
Yeah, the weather temperatures not just here locally, but around the country, and especially over the weekend, getting some cooler temperatures. So Florida seems like it looks pretty clear down there. I can see the sun out, some short sleeve t-shirts. So we'll focus on Tampa and Gulfstream today.
Yeah, no live racing at Aqueduct today or tomorrow. I know the Meadowlands canceled tonight as well. It is that cold spurt that's kind of working its way through the East Coast as well, but there is a great racing that is taking place in those southern states. And down in Florida, they have a very good card at Gulfstream Park tomorrow. The Holy Bull is going to be the feature race on the card, so a little bit later in the show, we will talk about that. But before we jump into races, just real quick, last week was the Pegasus World Cup. It was a really good field that was assembled. And I know you had talked a little bit about that winner there and the potential for some value, and our collector paid 15-1.
Yes, yeah. I made the case for him that, they just hadn't run during that first part of the year, and coming into the race off a layoff at a time of the year where the horse hadn't typically run, right into a Grade 1 race, showed me that they had this horse ready to run. And just with his running style and the way that track profile played, it's like I wanted a horse that was going to be forwardly placed. And even though he hadn't run at Gulfstream Park, and that was a little bit of a gamble, I saw it as an unknown, right. And just watching that horse as an individual, I'm like, he could take to this track, and found the right trip. A couple long shots that I actually mentioned for underneath was Stiletto Boy.
Yep.
And then I'm so bad at this, but we'll call him the 9, the horse that was coming in from Lucas out at Oaklawn Park. 2 long shots, but Stiletto Boy kind of sent hard and just sort of took the 5 defunded, and I even think Art Collector just kind of back a little bit and sat in that tracking trip and just had the stamina and had the class and offered the value. And really it kind of came the handicapping process from starting with Cyberknife and saying, okay, of course this horse can win, but he's going to kind of be the horse that everybody gravitates towards because he looks like so much the horse. And in that scenario, let's maybe get creative. So it made me kind of force myself out of that box and look at some different things.
And it definitely worked very well for you. I mean, it was a great effort by Art Collector. Again, you have a Hall of Famer in Belmont training it, an excellent training job. Very good effort there. All right, now with Club Hawthorne Live, what we do is we cover races live in real time, talk about betting strategies for those races that are taking place over a 1-hour period. The first couple of weeks we did 6 races over the course of that 1 hour, but again, no aqueducts. So only 4 races today. You're looking at the race lineup on the screen right there. We're going to take a look at 2 races from Tampa Bay Downs, 2 races from Gulfstream Park. But Emily, let's start right now by jumping into the field here for the second at Tampa Bay Downs. As the horses just walked on the track, you go 1 mile and 40 yards. These are $8,000 claimers, non-winners of 3 races lifetime. A big scratch in the 6 Pony Girl because that was the even money favorite in the morning line. Looking at the board right now, your favorite at even money is the 4 Timeless Glory. As you mentioned in our first 2 weeks, you kind of start with the favorite and work from there.
Absolutely.
So what did you see with Timeless Glory?
Well, yeah, I mean, you mentioned the scratch, which is the 6, and there would have been some questions there just as far as the horse stepping up in class to the N3 level after clearing the N2 condition and stretching out in distance for the first time. So with that horse out of the field, the public is kind of defaulting to the 4 in here. And certainly the 4 can win, ran a competitive race at this level last out, has the experience around 2 turns. So coming into this race with form, but is that short price because it's like, where else do you go? Now, this horse could certainly win, but there also kind of takes some speed out of the race. So I think that the 4 certainly fits. You could see the 4 winning. And then, as we're kind of talking and working our way out, you kind of see the attention sort of siding with the 1 and the 7, almost for those same reasons, sort of looking, the public looking for, well, I'm not crazy about the 4, it's sort of the favorite now by default, and landing on those 2 horses. And I kind of went in like a sort of kind of crazy different direction in here. If I'm looking at Optics Plot, which kind of gives the pace scenario, and Optics Plot for this race is a red plot fit. It's kind of all over the place. But the one thing that it does show me is that the 3 is the lone E horse. So could be a lone speed type scenario. Now, last week, I just missed that exacta with the apprentice rider. Yeah. So, and the part of that reason was I wanted the rider to be a little bit more aggressive because following the way she was riding, she was getting horses out of the gate well, but knowing she's not a strong finisher. So if I'm thinking that the 3 is going to be able to show speed. And there's some subtle trips in those last 2 races. On the turf, they didn't ask the horse for run. They showed a little bit of speed after breaking slow back on January 18th. So if they go to the front, show speed in a race where you kind of have some horses that might not want to go with the 3 early, or at least stalk and think she's going to come back to the field, just could be in a spot. So that's kind of my creative opinion in here.
And you know what? This is a race where you kind of have to look at it with a shorter field. You have to look at what the pace scenario is, what the pace setup is going to be in here. Bells will be ringing. The 3 horse should be able to show speed. It's interesting kind of looking through some of the prior riders, because the Bug Boy who rode the horse in those starts 2 and 3 back is actually on the 1 Glitter Bay in here. Those were the 2 horses that I worked around, were the 3 and the 1. Bells Will Be Ringing and the 1 Glitter Bay. Glitter Bay, they tried to face a little bit tougher in those starts 2, 3, and 4 back. They got back down to the $8,000 level in that last out and went 7/8 of a mile. It wasn't a bad effort. I was actually flattered a little bit more by this horse's effort, just for the fact that the entire race was run well wide. This was a horse that was kept in the clear. And maybe it's a bug rider keeping the horse in the clear. Maybe it's the way the race unfolded. The horse did have an outside draw from a field of 9 in there. But I think with the stretch and distance, you're going to rate a little bit closer. And like you mentioned, when you look at the plot, and there's not a ton of pace in here, you maybe think they bunch up a little bit. Maybe they go a little bit slower up front, so these horses that tend to make the front can kind of carry that speed a little bit farther. So the 1 and the 3 were the 2 horses that I looked to in this spot. The one I was a little bit curious about in here for all the action is the 7. That's Tammy Ann. This was a horse that I didn't really think the running style fit for this race, for kind of how the race is going to unfold. You're coming in off a layoff. You're taking a class drop. There's a whole lot of question marks to me for a horse that's taken a decent amount of action.
Yeah, I mean, the class relief alone is pretty significant based on the races where she had been running. The Belterra races probably stack up a little bit more on par in here, and especially for the barn change as well. It's more of a switch, and Barrett. Let me get to where the first name is here as I'm scrolling over. Grantley Barrett has only sent out one other horse, which was from the same barn, and was formerly a groom out in California, so it was kind of just taking over. And then the previous trainer, John Manning Jr., has only had like 1 winner in the past 2 years, which happened to be this particular horse. Right. So the fact that they are taking some support, maybe that's a positive sign, especially coming off the layoff. She certainly has races and numbers that fit at this level. Now going back to the 1 of the things that just kind of like concern me on there is if they're restarting the form cycle, because even though those 16,000 races, they're still non-winners of 2 condition. And so she had cleared the N2 condition on January 7th. That was on that kind of 3rd start of the layoff, wheeling back in just 6 days. So now it's like I just question whether they're going to kind of restart the form cycle here and then kind of race her forward again, because there's always that question when it's a step up, but as far as like par, and then might just catch the right field because it's not not the strongest group, right? It's going to kind of take the best horse on the best day, getting the right trip and all those things in this field. And it could still be the 4. I mean, the 4 just might have the class and the foundation edge that carries in this spot and wins at 4 to 5.
And here's the thing. I mean, there's so many things to dissect in here. Okay, the 4 has the benefit of the veteran jock who's a 20% rider. You have the benefit of a couple of bug riders going 2 turns and the weight off the horse. The question marks for me with the 7 Tammy Ann are you have barn switch, you have the layoff, only 1 workout. There's so much that really just leaves questions for me. And again, the running style going into the spot that I would probably look elsewhere. You're looking at 4 to 5 right now on Timeless Glory. And like you mentioned, off that last start, if you're looking as a figures player, you have to figure this is a horse that should be right there. If you look at the figures out of those starts 2 and 3 back, those figures are probably a couple notches below some others in this race. So that's one of the things where you kind of have to figure out how you want to see things unfolding. And you mentioned, too, you look at some of the class, right? This was a horse that was a bunch of Indiana bred allowances, then a 16, then an 8. So when you get a short field, it's kind of hard to try to figure out how you want to decipher things, how you want to wager on a race like this. But I think you're right. Try to beat that favorite. Look for a little bit of a price.
Yeah, I mean, the 4 is not necessarily one that I think is necessarily vulnerable. You always want to kind of classify these horses like in those type of scenarios. It's just short. It's just not a horse that I want to play at 3 to 5. Right. Yeah, she's probably running, and they're pointed to those Indiana bred races, which is probably a similar class par as far as like using the optics figure range. But those races are also $44,000 purses, which is a lot different than today's, which is, I believe, like $14,000 purse. So you could kind of say maybe she has been running against a little bit tougher because of that purse structure.
Yeah, I'm going to be curious to see, actually, if somebody jumps in and claims Timeless Glory in this spot. Now, after this race, we're going to be moving on to Gulfstream Park for back-to-back races. They're just walking into the paddock here for today's third at Gulfstream. That is a 5/8 of a mile turf sprint, and those are maidens in that spot. We're looking at the board right now. You have a 3-2 favorite in that race of the two. That's She's Stormy. So we will jump into that a little bit. Want to touch base also for everybody. If they want to watch the show, they can tune in on our YouTube channel for Hawthorne Racecourse. You can come out live this week. We're in Joliet. The next couple of weeks, we're in Crestwood, so we're going to be jumping around from different locations for anybody that does want to tune in and check out the show. And if somebody wants to come up, say hello to us, even during the show, we will probably say hello to you during the show as well, or after the show too. So there are a lot of times where you can kind of jump in and say hello to us. But they are walking into the gate at Tampa Bay Downs, so we're going to shift over there for our focus for Tampa Bay Downs for race number 2. Now, again, for those of you that watch Club Hawthorne Live, you're going to know we're not going to bring the track audio up because we may talk about different things that we notice throughout the course of a race, and just kind of when you're looking at maybe things for trip notes, how you see a race unfold and stuff like that. But that's why they're not going to hear the announcer, Emily. They're going to hear us and things that we see during the race.
Yeah, absolutely, which I think has been good. I think people have enjoyed that so far. And then we should have plenty of time. We'll go into Gulfstream 3. They're still in the paddock right now. We know Gulfstream gives us a few extra minutes, which is nice. So we'll use
especially on the turf,
today.
right?
And then right after Gulfstream 3, we're going to talk about the Holy Bowl, and then we'll do Gulfstream 4 and then close out with Tampa. So it's kind of a nice schedule today.
Yeah, no Aqueduct today. Again, for those that are tuning in, they did cancel out at Aqueduct. They canceled tonight at the Meadowlands as well, so you have racing both of the Florida tracks. I know Oaklawn's going today. Laurel Park surprising me as they're going today as well because it is quite cold out there. But the last one loading in the gate here for the second at Tampa Bay Downs. Again, your heavy favorite here is the 4. That's Timeless Glory. A little bit of activity out of the 1. Glitter Bather in the gate. So we're going to see how these horses get away from the gate and how things unfold here in race number 2.
Looks like 1's getting a little restless in the gate. Not too bad, but just a little restless in there, shaking the head about. Now it's getting a little bit worse. Slightly reared up. It all seemed to come away well. We'll see if that 3 can show some speed getting out there.
Looks like the rider's pushing on the 2 a little bit, too.
Absolutely.
That's Tiz Lottie, which surprises me because the running style really has never put that one on the lead, but that's who's going to inherit the lead as a 2. So Ronnie Allen Jr. puts this one out there.
Being a little bit more aggressive today, and probably the right call of this putting that horse in the race. But no kind of complaints. Kind of seems like the horses are stacked up where they want to be. The 4 certainly wants to be in her normal spot where she's tracking outside. The 5 wide. The concern on the 5 wheels, a horse we didn't really get a chance to talk to, but the distance was sort of one of those things. And then the 1, a horse that you're interested in getting a good trip, being able to stop covered up down inside and able to save ground. The 7 able to get over as well, while the 2 and the 3 continue to duel on the front end. Looks like the 2's starting to get pushed along a little bit. 3 seems to be kind of comfortable. As we know, not the strongest.
Bug pushes the 1 through, and if Bug Rider is going to push the 1 through if they can get through here, and that might be the trip right now.
Yeah, especially since last week, I know how the finish on the 3 could be a little bit weak, so I would have liked a little bit more separation there, but
he's riding the 4 too.
Yeah, the 1 looks good. That was just sitting the right trip all along. We'll see, maybe the 3 comes back, but I think the 1 looks.
So here's the thing about Tampa, and we talked about this in prior weeks, and in past years you couldn't win on the inside. Recently, you can get the job done with that rail trip. The 4 might just be the best horse here.
Absolutely.
The 1, I think, actually had the best trip, but it looks like the 4 is going to be your winner in Timeless Glory in this spot.
Yeah, and then the 7, that other horse that was, taking the money. So pretty chalky to start out, but relatively formful at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, and I wouldn't take anything away from either of the efforts of the 1 or the 3. They ended up running 3rd and 4th in that spot. That's one of those things. You get a heavy favorite, gets the job done, doesn't provide a whole lot of value. It does tend to happen, though.
Right, and it was one that we recognized was probably the horse that was like the legitimate favorite, just not much excitement as far as the odds to play.
Right. You might be able to find a little bit of excitement here in race number 3 at Gulfstream Park, as horses are on the track for the 3rd at Gulfstream. Again, 5/8 of a mile on the grass. These are maidens in this spot. You get a field of 9 to line up. Right now, the 2, She's Stormy, is your current favorite, as we'll head over to the post parade there. What were your initial looks here at this race, especially with a horse like She's Stormy, which actually surprised me a little bit, being favored over the 3 Little Jewel, although that one's 9-5, so those are the 2 taking the action.
Yeah, the one thing I will say that in these turf sprints, having that early speed is really key, and so that might be where the public is gravitating towards the 2 over the 3. The 2 showing speed last out. The 3 ran really well. I think they're coming out of that same common race back on January 6th, or it was kind of a blanket finish at the wire, and Little Jewel was able to save ground and close inside. Both those horses ran good races. I went kind of outside the box and outside the group in there. Now, granted, all those horses could certainly have the experience of this course and the intent in this race, but I looked at the 7 in this race, and it's not necessarily a first-time starter because the horse did debut back at Ellis, but has been off 523 days. So it is almost like to make a second start and still, a 4-year-old with that debut back as a juvenile. And they were entered to run at Churchill Downs the month after that debut, so obviously had that setback. Been watching her work. She looks fine just as far as visual and as far as the surface and distance. The thing is, they're going to have to show speed today with Leparoux because, like I said, that course profile. But everything else kind of checks the box as far as the horse being ready, as far as having that new face in here. It's just going to be a matter of trip. If they're aggressive, I'm going to really like the chances early. If they're not aggressive, could be a little bit tougher to overcome. But as far as the other horses that have run, they just haven't really quite shown enough to me to kind of get excited about. And so I wanted to kind of look at a new face in here. And a couple of those other horses, I mean, the one Tickle My Fancy, who's currently a big price on the board, so not going to talk.
That surprised me.
Not going to talk too much on that. But this is a horse that actually was with Belmont for a long time, and that's part of the reason why she has that barn change and now making her late season debut. Not really that excited about her work, so the board might be saying that they need one. Now, as far as the 4, it's another first-time starter in here. They scratched from unable to draw in at a Tampa race back on December 9th, so there has been a little bit of time since that scratch and picking this spot. And the barn also has another runner in this field, so I think the board might be kind of telling us a little bit something about those two. So again, I'm looking at the 10 is not necessarily a first-time starter, but can almost fit that angle if you're getting a little bit creative.
Yeah, and here's the thing about it. The board will tell you, especially with first-time starters, especially at those bigger meets, because word usually does get out. But Joe Orsino, they really don't win at first asking. He's 0 for 28 with first-time starters recently, and then it's a first-timer from the inside. So yes, I would look away too. Even though you get a very good jock and Tyler Gaffleone aboard, I would probably stay away from that one. Perfection Eyes, same thing. I mean, this is a horse that I think is probably going to need that start. Both of them Lasix for the first start out. Grace Candy, the 6, is interesting only for the fact that I think they're going to wing it and maybe keep things honest for She's Stormy, and that could be the one that throws a little bit of a pace complexion into the race, too.
Well, this was a horse that came up because she ran on January 20th. This was the one when she ran at Mountaineer, she stopped. And then going back to that January 20th, how I had mentioned those 5 furlong sprints, having that early speed is so key, and then the 10 ended up getting up late, right at the wire. So I think she was a little bit flattered in here, and now this is just such a big step up in class, going from that maiden 12.5 into this maiden special weight and having that track profile. But certainly you know what the game plan is that they are going to send, and maybe they're hoping for what happens last time, just get that track profile to carry. But there is other speed in here and maybe a little bit more classy speed today to keep her honest now with that step up in class and with the surface switch.
All right, so what do you make of a horse like the 8? That's Plan of the Day. This one from the barn of Saffie Joseph Jr. It's basically a 20% barn. They're almost 30% off lengthy layoffs. Blinkers on today. You're coming out of a 5/8 of a mile turf sprint at Horseshoe Indianapolis where the horse had the 11 hole out of 12. Now took action, was bet down to 9-2 in that spot. Didn't really run a whole lot. Ended up finishing 10th out of that field of 12. They're not taking a whole lot of action, which surprises me here because it's a very good rider in Junior Alvarado, a very good barn in Saffie Joseph Jr., and you're looking at 14-1 on the board. That was a little surprising to me.
Yeah, you still have the same kind of class concerns because this is a step up with the circuit change. They might just be giving the horse a race. That was pretty much my concern. As far as the race at Horseshoe Indianapolis, did have that outside draw, did break slow, was caught wide. So you could make those excuses, but again, you'd kind of expect to come back on a little bit shorter rest than 226 days. So my concern was maybe that they are giving this one a race and maybe needs a little bit softer.
What I'm curious about, I was looking at the 5 horse, Mrs. Whistler. All right, This is one of the My Racehorse horses. They always fire on their horses. I mean, you normally see these horses way over bet in this spot. I'm actually surprised that you're seeing 6-1 on Mrs. Whistler in here, because the last couple of races haven't been too bad. That last out comes out of that same race as Little Jewel, and she's Stormy in there. It was okay. It didn't seem to have the late kick that some others did, though, in that spot.
She closed okay, actually, in that race. But those prior races are a little bit softer because those are the Gulfstream races that are in June and July. So it's over the summer. It's not the championship meet. Yeah, not the championship meet. So and ran kind of paired up speed figures from her July 15th race. So yeah, certainly could. I mean, in terms of race par, she's facing those horses that all come out of that January 6th race. Again, just kind of another one where I was looking at those horses and I could see one of those three winning, but at the same time, I wanted to kind of steer in a different direction. But no real strong knocks.
Right. All right. Now, one thing that I find interesting, and we're going to talk about this here because this does happen in the racing industry, and I think they did a really good job, is when you get these cancellations of racetracks, like Aqueduct canceled today, for example. Initially, Tampa's third was going to go at 1:46. They were going to take an insane amount of time between their second and third. But now with Aqueduct canceling, Tampa's being very smart. You can see this race is only 15 minutes to post, so we will probably pivot a little bit in some of our talking just for how things are going to unfold, because Tampa's actually going to come earlier. And I think what happened is management was smart. They were wise. They see that Aqueduct canceled. You find a slot that you can jump in and make a lot of money, and Tampa always does very well. So after this race, our next race actually is going to be the third from Tampa. I still think we're going to have time to talk about the Holy Bull after this third race from Gulfstream as they load, but just so everybody knows, we are going to jump to Tampa next.
That's perfect, yep.
They're loading into the gate right now for the third at Gulfstream again. Your favorite on the board has moved over to the 3. That's a Little Jewel in here. If I was looking for a price, maybe I'd throw a few bucks there on the A plan of the day, only because of the connections in 13-1. Emily, what are you expecting, I guess, more than anything for a race like this?
You know, I mean, I think the horses that have form are going to kind of run to the races that they've been running in the past. We have just those new faces of what we're going to see out of those first-time starters, you know, out of the 7 again, looking for Jillian Leparoux to hopefully be aggressive on that horse. The other horse we didn't talk about is a 9, who certainly has the numbers that stack up on par, but as far as class and putting like forward like that winning effort, hasn't quite been there yet. So they're off. Out in front looks like the 2. They're in the head-on.
I wonder if that's the 6 pushing him along. It is a 6, the horse we talked about in that last start
out in front. You have the 3 stalking behind, so pretty similar. The 9's caught wide. The 7, they did ask for speed a little bit, but ended up not quite being quick enough to run with those top 2, getting caught wide and starting to lose ground. The 3 has been in a great spot, stalking the duel, so should be in the right spot there.
The 8's in between horses there. He's kind of scrubbing on that horse a little. Yeah, kind of getting ridden along
a little bit. Looks like that horse needs a little bit softer.
This is another really big effort out of the 6, too.
The 5 is starting to make a run. Yep. But we'll see. Kind of the 3 got just such a good trip from start to finish, just sitting right off. And looks like again, the 9 I mentioned, sort of one of those horses. It's like picks up a check each time. I thought the 5 put in a good run, but trip just prevailed, and the 7 actually came back on and ended up running 4th. So maybe might be one to follow in there, making the second start back off the layoff, getting some experience.
Yeah, so you get back-to-back favorites here to open up the day. And again, it looked like it form-wise off those last couple of starts. Irad Ortiz was the one that picked up the call in this one. A good effort there, ended up getting bet all the way down to even money. So really not a whole lot of value there in today's third at Gulfstream. Now, Emily, before we move over to the third at Tampa Bay Downs again, our feature race is going to take place tomorrow, and that is the 12th from Gulfstream Park. That is the Holy Bull. It goes 1 mile and a 16th. 20 Derby points are on the line. We do have some Derby preps starting to pop up for these 20-point races. In past years, 20 points might have actually gotten you into the Derby. Now I think you probably need to get a little bit more, maybe right around that 30-point barrier. But looking at this race, it's 1 mile and a 16th. It's a grade 3 race for the Holy Bull tomorrow. And I guess we start with the horse that is the likely favorite in here. That's Cyclone Mischief, the 4. This one from the barn of Dale Romans. What are you showing on the plots here, and what do you make out of Cyclone Mischief in the Holy Bull?
Yeah, the plot's having a hard time in here because there's so many horses that are doing something new, especially with the 8.5 distance and going 2 turns. So it's one of those those scenarios where pace, you just might not want to try to kind of outline exactly what these horses are going to do. But Cycle and Mischief probably going to show some tactical speed. They've been able to be on or near the lead in the past. The biggest question for me as far as Cycle and Mischief is distance.
Sure.
Because when you're looking at this horse, you can look on paper and say the horses run fine around 2 turns. But when you're watching this horse from the visual standpoint, like what that horse is telling you in physicality, not necessarily sold that the more ground the better, but a lightly race developing horse we're going to see. Now, as far as speed figures in class, especially in this field, kind of stands out a little bit, so I know we're talking about this race. It kind of seems like the 4 and the 8 are going to be the 2 favorites in here, and it almost seems like, to me, in my opinion, I think the 8 will end up going favored.
And it very well could. Rocket Can from the barn of Bill Mott. I mean, we just saw Mott and Alvarado strike last week in the Pegasus World Cup.
And that could be part of the
Sure.
reason the horse takes money.
Sure.
People have that in their mind, and that's fresh. And
especially when you tune in for the big days and big races. Yes.
Yeah, those things come fresh. And I mean, the horse makes sense too. It's an improving type horse that's gotten better and has the fast speed figures, has had some favorable trips, especially in that maiden win. Now, it was a solid effort, but I still want to see if this horse can kind of pass horses.
Sure.
And especially with this track configuration, this horse just might be good enough to overcome. But one of the things that I mentioned in the Hawthorne write-up for this race is they do break into that first turn.
Yep.
And so, you're going to kind of, Junior Alvarado is going to have to work another good trip, which he's certainly capable of. And if you're on one of the best horses, even with a less than ideal post, sometimes you can just overcome it.
Right, it's that break right into the first turn, and then at a mile and a 16th at Gulfstream, because of the track configuration, it's also a short stretch. So for those that are trying to make up ground, sometimes they get hung a little bit wider in the turn, and you have to keep an eye on that. The one thing with Cyclone Mischief that I'm curious to find out is the horse ran a huge race in that last out, but that was also with the addition of Lasix there. Now, you have to come off Lasix for the graded stakes, so you don't know how much of an impact it's going to have on the horse or not. The races prior were still good enough to be competitive, speed figure wise, but you have to find out if, hey, this horse improved because of the addition of the diuretic, or if the horse just is continuing to improve as this one goes throughout the course of its 3-year-old campaign too.
It's a question for sure, but one of the other things I will mention is the horse is coming out of that Kentucky, it's like the KYJC grade T race, and that is typically a pretty strong race.
Yep.
Now, we saw one of the horses, that Red Route Road, finish second behind Arabian Night. A couple of their horses have come back out of that race and actually improved as well.
Yeah.
So taking a step forward number-wise, it's so hard to say that it was an individual, because we've seen so many horses from that race step forward next out. And that's just something to keep in mind, because that race always seems to be productive.
Could be a key race,
yeah. And it has been year after year.
Right.
It's one of those races that you kind of just see horses move forward from. And shout out to my partner at Optics, John Doyle, who really kind of put me onto that angle there. But that's something to keep in mind. To your point, is it could be the Lasix that move the horse up, but also at the same time, we could see a regression, because if the horse was sitting on that move forward, coming out of that stakes race, coming out of that key race, and did move forward to a top, there could be some backwards movement, especially because they are going to come back in less than 30 days in the second start of the cycle.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that you got to kind of watch too, is how horses will handle the different courses and the quick returns or their timing leading in. We've talked about it. Oaklawn Park does a very good job. It's the Southwest to the Rebel to the Arkansas Derby. You look down at what they do at the fairgrounds, it's the same thing. Here at Gulfstream Park, it's the Mucho Macho Man, into the Holy Bull, into the Fountain of Youth, into the Florida Derby. So you might see some of these horses come back with a progression from one of these stakes at Gulfstream to the next to the next. That leads me into a little bit with the 6th. That's Legacy Isle in this spot. This was a horse that's made all 3 starts at Gulfstream Park, ran in the Mucho Macho Man back on New Year's Day, ran a good race there. I guess my question for this horse too is, now you're starting to add a little bit more distance. Is the distance going to be an issue in your mind for Legacy Isle?
It can be, especially because the way that the horse finished. I mean, there was a disqualification that maybe was a little bit controversial, but at the same time, Legacy Isle did create those issues by drifting out and being on that left lead, and now you're getting more ground, and it could be a taxing effort. And they did also, it's another horse that moved forward in that second start of the form cycle, so you're going to have to move forward again, or at the least hold your form from that race while taking on some new faces and getting that added ground as well.
And that's the thing, and you mentioned it there and you talk about it, and this is important to talk about. Okay, the horse got disqualified because it drifted out. A lot of times they drift out or they switch leads because they're getting tired. They're trying trying to do everything they can just to get into the finish. They're kind of spinning their wheels, doing just, I mean, you see guys who kind of are stumbling along as they're trying to finish a race. It happens with horses too. Maybe the progression of a little bit more time helps. It's only a month between races, again, from a horse that I agree with you, I thought was getting tired getting near the finish line there, so that was a concern.
And this is a horse, too, that has shown a pattern of not changing leads,
going
out throughout their career.
It's one thing that we'll see kind of how things unfold from the betting end of things. Like you mentioned, watch the board if you're going to bet the race tomorrow, because I agree with you. Cyclone Mischief is your morning line favorite. Rocket Can is a horse that could and probably should take some money. If the horse doesn't, I think that might be your play in the race.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'll be interesting how they bet, but mostly think about these races going forward, especially with a lot of the preps this weekend out in California. You only have that 4-horse field, so it's not really
are they all Bafferts? I think
and they're all Bafferts. Yeah. So it's, and again, just think about those horses, and most of those Baffert horses too. They've been running against other Bafferts. It's kind of been a bizarre year that way. But make notes on those horses going forward, even if you end up kind of not playing the race where you don't see an opportunity or whatever, how they're going to progress going forward. Because as you mentioned, this isn't the final race that they're looking to win, right? They're looking to just use this kind of as a stepping stone. Of course, they all want to win, but they're not trying to say, all right, we're totally peaked. This is it. We're going for it type thing. So make those notes and think kind of down the road where you see these horses improving.
Yeah, these aren't the races that are life or death to get all those points to try to get into the Derby. Once you get to the 50-point events and the 100-point events, that's where you want to look. All right, let's head over to Tampa Bay Downs, race number 3. Horses are on the track here for the third of Tampa. We go 1 mile and 40 yards in this spot. 8-on-2 company, and it's kind of funny because we just had the 8-on-3. Scratch the 2, that's a Swift Kid in here. The 5 right now, El Policia, is your current favorite. Jose Ferrer, who just won the second, is aboard this horse, so I guess that's probably where we start. What do you make of the 5, El Policia, here in race number 3 at Tampa?
Yeah, I mean, again, I just think it's a spot where they're trying to find something and something to latch onto. And El Policia is fine, but again, it's just short and a horse that just doesn't have much of an edge over the others. There's so many horses that are coming out of common races, and out of those common races, it's so hard to find a horse that you want to like in this race. And the 6 being the second choice in here, and I could see that as well, and that's kind of where I went to, because the horse has back numbers at Gulfstream Park, is now third off a layoff, has the experience where they move forward around 2 turns. But I had just had a hard time with this race because I just couldn't like anybody.
Sure.
And I just had knocks on so many in this field, and trying to find value when there just doesn't seem a lot on the board and not giving you a whole lot to work with.
Yeah, you see us glancing up to the right a lot. We're just looking at the horses on the screen there, but it was one of those things. The 6 grand player was actually without a pony in the post parade. Picked up the pony there, though, coming out of the post parade. It might have just been a timing thing more than anything else. That was the horse, to me, that probably made the best impression in the post parade here, and it comes from a barn that's winning at a 30% clip, so definitely worth looking to for grand player. A couple other horses in here that you may want to give a little bit of a look to. The 3, Had Right. This is a horse that's currently sitting at 3-1 on the board. Numbers-wise, they've been okay over the course of those last couple of starts. Comes out of the same race as El Policia on that start, 2 back, going 7/8. Well, the last out wasn't bad by any means. Again, shorter field, though. You kind of have to see what you're going to get running style-wise, and if the horse gets into the race a little bit quicker early on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's as a positive, you're seeing a horse that's moved forward in each start, starting that form cycle back on December 2nd. You can kind of see that speed figure progression, which is a positive, especially when you're considering that turf race coming off the layoff in December was probably a prep, and then they've had 2 wide trips, and they're going to come back in 7 days. So it seems like the 3 would probably, if they are going to run a peak effort, this would probably be the time to do it.
And here's what's curious. You almost tend to wonder if this was a race that was really just kind of thrown together to round out the card here, because the 1's coming out of that race on January the 27th. The 3 is, the 4 is as well. That's a quick return for these horses when you're coming back out of a 2-turn race into a 2-turn race. So I'm a little bit surprised.
Yeah, especially when you look at horses that don't necessarily do that. So one of the circuits that I follow is Horseshoe Indianapolis, and I'm following that circuit over the years and making notes. It's like I will see some of these horses that will come back on short rest. So when they do it, it's like, okay, I've seen them do it before, or I sort of know what they're doing. So kind of to your point, it might just seem like they're like, look, we need get in here. We will
Yeah,
take whatever
right,
we
we're
can. It
trying to
might be
fill a
one of
race.
those things because there are horses that typically do not race back on those quick 1 week turnarounds.
And when you talk about it, all right, when you look into what goes on in a racing office and they're trying to fill out a card, they're saying, okay, we have to have a certain amount of races to fill out a card. When they call these trainers up, basically what then they're saying is, okay, you're going to get a short field, so you're going to have that chance to get a check. So that's kind of what the appeal is, to draw some of these horses into a race like this. If you're going to the barn of any of these horses, the 1, 3, or 4, that's where you're going to say, okay, it's a 7-horse field on paper, but we expect that there's going to be a scratch in the race. You're going to only get a 6-horse field for $14,000. You have that shot. Past a couple of horses, you get a decent check in there. Maybe you win. But that could be the appeal for some of these horsemen because they're just coming out of a 10-horse field at the same level. Now you get a little bit shorter field, but when you're looking at racing secretaries, that's their job to try to fill the fields here. And I think that's kind of what happened with some of the horses in this race too.
Yeah, one horse I'll mention is actually the one horse right now who's on the screen. It's kind of one other horse that's going to come out of that common race where they did make an inside move, and another horse that's kind of shown some progression race to race in this form cycle. And looking at Optics Plot again, it's kind of like the last race where not a lot of form to really kind of line up and have a lot of confidence, but it does kind of look like a scenario where some of these horses have a similar running style and they could bunch up, where the one being especially down inside is able to save ground. It might be able to get the type of trip where if everybody kind of starts backing up late, and then you're really taking a risk kind of going out there, but pretty much a risk in this race all around because taking a short price I think feels a little bit vulnerable as well, to be honest.
No, I agree with you. You got 2 horses at 2 to 1 and the 5 and the 6. I mean, the 6 is a horse that I thought would get a good trip. The 7 horse at 9 to 2, Cedar Beach, is a little bit interesting here as well. Mike Deeney, a guy that we saw in the Chicago circuit for many years, wins at a pretty high clip, 20% rate. This horse has only raced at Tampa aside from its debut back in 2021. It won its last start last April at Tampa. That was the maiden score. Then after that, some time away from the races, comes back there off about an 8-month rest into that last spot. I tend to wonder if maybe the horse needed a start in that last race in for the 8 and on 2, and then comes back here off that race. You come back in off a workout into this spot, and it was a pretty good workout, a half-mile drill in 48 and 2. For a barn that does okay in the second off a lengthy layoff, do you make a case for Cedar Beach in here?
Yeah, I mean, certainly with this field, you can start excusing a lot of things. I wasn't, and I wanted to get there for those reasons. And I'm like, oh, this horse seems to make the most sense. It's second off a layoff, but it's almost second off a layoff, almost in like a bad way, because where you have all these other horses that are coming back on short rest, this horse has been off 37 days. You do mention the workout, but it's one workout in January from after that December 28th. So if you were thinking, okay, the horse is a little bit short, we'll bring it back off the layoff, you'd expect that horse to be back in less than 30 days, or at least have a couple more works than just one. So that's what gave me the reservations. But in this type of spot, I feel like anything is possible. Even at this point, the 4 wouldn't surprise. Well, it's just going to take. I mean, that horse has to have
the 4's probably
trips.
winging it. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be anything.
That's the thing, though, about non-2 races. These horses don't know how to win. They've only figured out how to do it once, and especially when you get starts that start to mount up and mount up and mount up over the course of time, it's for a reason. It's because these horses haven't shown that ability to win. And you see these conditions also come back a little bit more quickly because it's a smaller purse that a racing secretary has to use. But there are a lot of non-2 horses out there. There's a lot of maidens out there. So that's kind of how things unfold. For me, if I was looking at the board right now, I'd probably throw a few bucks maybe on the 1. Maybe I'd hook it up with the 6 grand player in here and see if I could catch a little exact.
Yeah, I like that too. Kind of getting a little bit of a price with the horse that you feel is a little bit logical. Makes as much sense as anything, as far as I'm concerned.
I love at Tampa Bay Downs, these mile and 40 starts, because I think this is where you get the best look at horses loading into the gate on their graphics. You get the best look at horses coming out of the gate because you get that head-on shot there. Those sprints that they have there, a lot of them are blocked by trees, so it's very hard to see horses coming out of the gate when you're making your trip notes a little bit. But they are walking in here for the 3rd at Tampa. After that, we'll head over to Gulfstream for race number 4, as that will round out today's show of Club Hawthorne Live. But you have a couple more to load in here for the 3rd at Tampa. Right now, your favorite on the board, still sitting there with the 5. That's El Policia. The 6 grand player was up to 5 to 2 for a second. Back down to 2 to 1
favorites
though.
Right now, the 5 and the 6.
So far, everybody's standing just fine in the gate. We'll see how things go. They got away just fine from the gate for today's 2nd, too, even though you had that horse that was acting up on the inside. I am curious to see. I am expecting the 4 to be on the lead when they head into the first turn here, though. And the 4 breaks last.
And the four breaks
So there you go.
Same with the 1.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of saw that too. The 4 has actually had some gate issues, but
Yep.
in the past, the 6 was expected to be forwardly placed and in that stalking trip, so in a good spot. And assertive with the 7 from the outside, which is probably the right strategy with that post, especially in this field.
It was a
And
dream
those
for them with
horses-
the 4 missing
and
the
with-
start.
Yeah, and with the horse missing the break too, kind of helped out a little bit. So we'll see where it unfolds here. The 5 is stalking, and the 6, not necessarily super fast, but again, we're talking, it's all relative for the level. The 1
Yeah.
able to save ground with the 3 covered up. The 4 starting to kind of find their legs a little bit after the slow start, but a little bit climbing over the surface as well.
Climbing, quick return, yeah.
Yeah, 6 is starting to cut into the gap of the 7. The 7 we saw kind of lose ground last time and kind of looks like maybe
6
that's
is a
gonna be the
much
case.
larger horse than the 7. Look
Yeah,
at him
right?
size-wise as he ranges up next to the 7.
Yeah, the 7 might ultimately, maybe they want to cut back. Maybe we'll see a second off from that horse this time.
I mean, he's riding confidently on the 6 right now. He's
Yeah,
starting
absolutely.
to scrub
And
a
the
little
1
bit.
has some run, has been able to save ground, which might be to a benefit with those other horses going wide. So we'll see if the 1 kind of comes up the inside here. Could be looking at that 6-1 as they make
This is
final
that bug
turn.
rider on the 1 that we talked about, though, and the ability to finish is the one thing that can be a little bit concerning here because the horse had a dream trip and now looks to flatten out a little bit.
Yeah.
The 6 just has the big stride, too. I mean,
Yeah,
it's one of those things might be able to kick on. Let's see if the horse switches leads or not.
But yeah, it looks like 6-3. The
Yep.
5 was wide throughout. The 1 just kind of lacking that kick. But yeah, the 6 kind of a horse that both you and I felt was kind of the best of the rest, let's say.
All right, so here's the thing now, and we're going to talk about this a little bit because you talk about bug riders. All right, the bug rider on the 1, only 7 mounts coming into today for a 10-pound bug. So it's a learning experience, too, as you go into it. It wasn't a bad effort, made a pretty good move there, coming into the turn, kind of got out behind horses a little bit, maybe slowed the momentum slightly. So this is something that you watch moving forwardly here for a rider that might be kind of learning things a little bit, too, as they progress through races.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to fault the ride in there.
Right.
I thought they did everything right, being able to save ground. Just you got to have the horse under you.
Yeah, finished
as
third,
well.
and it wasn't a bad effort by any
No,
means.
they did. I thought they did well, having the horse, giving the horse the best chance, and just not being good enough, which.
You know what?
No surprise. We'll have another N2 maybe next week for these guys to run back in.
Right. I mean, the horse that we both talked about right there at the start of that race was a 6 grand player.
Yep.
You end up getting 2-1. Maybe a little bit shorter than you'd hope for, but in a race like that, again, a shorter field, that can tend to happen at times. But you know what? I think the horse ran a pretty solid race. I think it was a good effort there for a barn that, like we mentioned, has been winning at a 30% clip on the meet. They're spotting their horses the right way, and they're getting the results for it as well.
Yeah, so we'll go over to Gulfstream Park, and it's kind of interesting, and I'll kind of key off what we were talking about a little bit, because as the 1 is favored here, and this is a first-time starter for Bill Mott and Junior Alvarado, so I think this horse is actually kind of taking some steam for those connections. And my concern with this horse, I didn't really mind a first-time starter in this race necessarily, but the 1 is a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
That's a lot of time to make a first start, and it's a lot that now you're going to take a short price on a horse that's clearly had some issues going in there. So I'm a little bit surprised, and I think that could be some buzz money. Now, the 4 is also a first-time starter. It's a 4-year-old to make his first start, but if you look at the 4, it's on his left side. He has this massive scar on his hip. Like, it's huge. I don't know. They might not show you. You need to see it, but he has this, like, huge scar on there, because I was watching his workouts, that there might have been some injury. I mean, it's pretty significant, and that might have been some of the role. I thought he was working fine. Again, seems a little bit short, but again, could be some of the barn money and not anywhere to go. And the 5 was listed as the morning line favorite, who kind of seemed like it would have been a softer favorite, especially with the distance cut back. But now that that horse is drifting a little bit, you kind of start maybe moving that one into the selections. The horse that I was interested in Scratch, so I will stop talking.
Just looking up and down the field here. I mean, the 2 Dr. Kringle comes out of this spot here, and I didn't have that one earlier, so I wonder if that was a little bit of a later scratch.
Yeah, I think it was a late scratch, because actually I did bet the horse a couple minutes ago.
So that you get a later scratch there. You have the first-time starter from the Mott barn. This is a horse that, again, it's a 5-year-old debuting, goes off for, is currently sitting at 7-5. I'm curious to see if we do get a look at this 4 horse, because I want to see if that pops up. Because there's the thing, there's always reasons, especially for these horses that are extremely well bred, these big purchase price horses, you want to see them at 2, you want to see them at 3. So when a horse is debuting at 4 or 5, then there's reasons for it, and it's usually not a good reason for it, for why these horses have been away from the track. But you're looking at it on the post parade, there's the one, a la carte, looks okayer in the post parade, 5-year-old debuting.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of Belmont horses, which tend to catch my eye for whatever reason. They just do. He just turns his horse out very well. And the dam was kind of a favorite of mine, Lee Court. She ran for Josie Carroll and ran some good races. I think won a stakes race at Fairgrounds as well.
Yeah, Jonah's Dream.
Woodbine.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's the 4. It's on the left side, so it'll be on the pony side where that scar is. Might not be able to see it. You might have to zoom in a little bit close.
The best turned out winner.
Yeah.
Citizen Mac 3-1, so
that's fine.
Yeah. I was curious a little bit about the 7-10 extra. I want to see what that one looks like.
I was interested in that horse because he's kind of a runoff type, and I'm like, that might work in here. That might work to have a runoff type horse. And he looks on the smaller side, and they're finally going to cut this horse back and has some speed. Gaffleone, especially being outside, and this is not a horse that does settle. So seems pretty fair right now, 13-1.
I want to go dive into this horse a little bit more, the 7-10 extra. Okay, they thought enough about this horse that they debuted against Maiden Allowance Company at Churchill Downs last November. They won 3/4 in the slot. Okay, is there an excuse for that or not? Maybe.
2 years ago.
2 years ago, I'm sorry, 2021, thank you. And then you go, okay, an early season race at Gulfstream, another early season race, another, but those were all during the championship meet and all going a little bit longer. Then you get that layoff, and then you're coming back on the synthetic at Turfway, and it was a much improved race. And the horse shows some speed in that spot going 3/4 of a mile, but you're back at the same distance, probably going to show some speed. Outside draw, you have to figure they're going to be winging it. I think this is a horse that might try to sneak away early on.
Yeah, absolutely. And watching this horse, both in training and in running, it's not a horse that does settle.
Right.
So it's a horse that you need to just kind of let them go. And not try to fight them and take away that asset. And I think that's going to be the strategy in here.
Yeah.
And the outside post just might be the benefit, and just catching kind of maybe the right field as well.
Right.
And as you mentioned, there probably was good intent just based on the placement of those races and where they brought this horse. And I think just kind of looking at him physically is kind of on the smaller side. Seems like a one-turn type horse.
Yeah, and I think they're going to send from the get-go. So maybe that's a horse that I would throw in my gimmicks a little bit at 12-1. The one horse you're looking there, that's a la carte on your screen again. The first Lasix for the debut. It's a 5-year-old debut, and you do see a lengthy pattern of workouts into the spot. The one thing about those horses early on in their career, especially the ones debuting from the inside, you have to get away from the gate. You don't want to get squeezed back early on, so you have to figure Alvarado's at least trying to send for position early on. Jonah's Dream right next to it, I don't think necessarily is going to be that quick out of the gate, so Lakota Territory is kind of the one that may dictate things. And it's hard because you really don't know until early on, but I think a horse like a la carte probably does have to show a little bit of speed early on in this debut.
Yeah, of course. It's just so hard to tell, right?
I mean,
the big knock to me was like being a 5-year-old first-time starter.
Right.
And Mott in general is a barn that's capable with first-time starters, but it's not.
They don't
win a lot, and it does start getting into a different category when these horses are older. And I think people forget to kind of separate that.
Right.
That a barn that's good with juvenile first-time starters in the spring. A Wesley Ward out on the West Coast, Luis Mendez, these barns that win first out, that kind of have those numbers. And then that changes with 3-year-olds. It changes later in the calendar. And then, of course, at 4 and at 5, then it's really kind of a different ball game. You can see that there's the scar on his hip right there.
Yeah,
you see it
and you do get a
camera?
good look at that at the 4.
Yeah.
And a little bit washy there behind, too. So.
Oh, no, that's the scar.
That's the scar that you're looking at
see
there?
how big that is?
It is. That's a huge scar.
That's why I was like, there must have been something that
Okay.
happened with this guy, because it's pretty extreme.
Well, and there's probably a reason you didn't see the horse. I mean, you find out it wasn't a farm accident, a stall accident, something that put this horse off a little bit. Jumping back to the one, looks good on track. Jumping back to the one, just one thing. I mean, like you mentioned, Bill Mott, it's not a small sample size for first-time starters either. He wins at about an 8% rate. off a large sample size for the horses that are debuting. So a la carte, a horse that definitely
But
I think.
But what is it with 5-year-olds?
Right, well,
Four-year-olds
right, correct.
We have to kind of separate.
And that's what you have to look to. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that go into this. So again, you kind of look at the board and you look at what the complexion is for how you may want to wager this race. Maybe you jump back in to bring the 5 Citizen Mac backs into the mix a little bit here. This was a horse that had a couple of maiden allowance starts at Saratoga during the summer. Now you come back in off the layoff. The barn wins an 11% rate off a lengthy layoff here, but Citizen Mac currently sitting at 5-2, so it didn't take a ton of action in this spot by any means, but it isn't completely cold on the board either.
No, not at all. And I think it is one of those races where sometimes the morning line people start to change a little bit because, even when I looked at it, I was like, well, the 5, there's no reason why the 5 should be that short, right? So automatically as a player, you're kind of like, I'm going to go outside, right? Which isn't that creative. So people are looking at those 2 first-time starters, and then all of a sudden the 5 kind of gets lost a little bit, gets a little bit dismissed because people are thinking, I didn't want to take a short price. Well, now you're on short prices. Now do you want the one at 9-5 where you thought you were going to be a little bit creative and you're going to get 5-1 with a first-time starter, or I think the 4 probably would have taken the money anyways, just being a Pletcher first-time starter with a Rod Ortiz aboard, things that kind of take attention from the public, and then that's leaving some of those other horses alone. The 3 and the 6, maybe a little bit softer as far as class. Both those horses are stepping up, and then the 7 that both you and I are like, why not? Why not?
At 12-1, why not? And that's the thing. And I make the line at Hawthorne, and I do look at stuff like this. Okay, you look at the connections, but yeah, it would scare me a little bit with the 1 a la carte scene, a 5-year-old first-timer. Okay, what's the reason? Same with the 4 Lakota Territory, a 4-year-old first-timer. At least if you're looking at making a line, you do have some races on paper with some figures that put a horse like Citizen Mac in the mix. I probably would have made that horse my favorite in here as well. Now, Lakota Territory, like you mentioned, it's Irad Ortiz, it's Todd Pletcher. That's a horse that you have to figure is going to take some action. Now they're co-favorite at 9-5. And really the wild card in the race was the 1 that is a la carte. So then you go off, what do people see in the morning for the workouts? What do you expect? Who has Bill Mott or the connections or anyone talk to here? Because that's the thing, too. For a meet like Gulfstream, it's not like you're looking at a win pool that's going to have $10,000, $12,000 in it. You're going to have a substantial win pool here. So there's a lot of money that has to go in to make a horse like that 9-5. So there are some reasons behind it as well.
Yeah, the one looking at the work tab on the 1 does have a bullet work back on January 15th, and that might draw the attention. But to me, I look more at spacing. Before that, the horse worked on January 2nd, so it was like almost 2 weeks later, and then has another 10 days. And we know, you see these horses, they work, once every 6-7 days, 5 to 7 days. So that to me is a little bit concerning. And this one, obviously, as we mentioned, has had their fair share of setbacks.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, you see Bullet Drill on the 28th, comes back a week later, Bullet Drill on the 5th. Then it's another week later, and then another week, and then you're right. There's spacing between works leading into this spot. So was it they were trying to nurse the horse to get to that debut? There's a lot of things that would scare me, at least for the horse at 8-5.
Yeah, absolutely, and not one I would mess around with. And if they win, they certainly, they certainly can, but not one that I'm playing at 8-5. Those are just kind of horses I'm not excited about at short prices.
Yeah, that would be a play against for me as well. I'm going to chair a little bit here for the 10. That is 10 extra. See if this one gets away in good order and shows a little bit of speed. Again, the debut horses, the 1 and 4, have to get away from the gate, just skip position early on. So we'll see how things unfold here.
1 broke a little bit slow, and same thing with the 4, broke a little bit slow, but they're all kind of rushing up a little bit. The 3 is up there, the 4 in stalking, and the 7, a horse that we thought would be a little bit more aggressive. Doesn't seem like maybe they're handling the track, but they're kind of stalking wide in there, where the 3 is taking advantage of the 1 stalking back, the 4 is tracking, the 6 racing covered up, 7 going wide. The 3 is able to kind of sneak away out there. The 1's getting a good trip if the 3 comes back, and the 4 are also stalking as well. So,
22 to the opening quarter. So
we'll see here. But yeah, the 1's in a good spot, 4 both in a good spot. Both those horses could win from there. Looks like the 3 is starting to back up a little bit. Yeah, 7. We kind of thought the horse would have to show speed, and then that would be it. but it looks like it's going to come down to the 1 or the 4 as they head into the stretch.
Well,
Looks like the 4 is going to have a little bit stronger finish, but we'll see. On the outside, we got a little bit of leaning, which I think we've seen from Ortiz a time and again, but it looks like the 4 is going to kind of sneak on by. We'll see if there's an inquiry. There might have
no
been a little
excuses
brush
really
in
out
there.
of the 1 by any means.
No,
that was a
no,
good effort on debut.
sat the right trip. Yep.
A little bit of staggering out of some of those others late. I mean, the 4 we mentioned, I mean, it's Ortiz, it's Pletcher. It's a great combination for that first start out. Pletcher wins at a 20% rate. I'm curious to see what the price was here because, okay, 9 to 5
still
over
the
7
second
to 5.
choice in the race. Not bad necessarily. 5 didn't show much, which was not as much of a surprise. Probably just not the right spot for that horse. Not a race I think I'd be looking to see as productive going forward,
not really.
to be honest. But somebody had to win, and you know,
they bet
Todd
$863,000 on the race too.
Right.
And that's what happens when there's not a whole lot that's going on out there overall throughout the course of the racing scene. All right, again, our feature race tomorrow is the Holy Bull at Gulfstream Park. Emily, we are going to be out at Crestwood for the next couple of weeks. So if you want to check in, we're going to be at our Crestwood location. But it is one of those things that we're going to start seeing because we focus on Tampa, we focus on Gulfstream and then Aqueduct. We might start to see some of these horses come back a little bit. So that'll help when you're making notes moving forward, too.
Well, yeah, like we had the horse already at Gulfstream Park in that third race, the horse that we saw kind of back up on the lead there. So, yeah, it does help. Following these horses, following the circuits is always key.
Yeah, it is always the key. We want to thank everybody for tuning in today to Club Hawthorne Live. Again, we're from our Club Hawthorne OTB in Joliet today. We're going to be out at Crestwood our next couple of weeks. So good luck to you with all of your selections. For Emily Gullikson, I'm Jim Miller. We thank our TV crew as well. Thank you once again, and we'll join you again next week on Club Hawthorne Live.